Welcome back to the system. This is the closeout for the first week in November, but in a lot of ways this can be seen as a continuation of our fourth week in October, kind of a part two as it was. And that's because, as you'll recall in our last closeout for October, we did that test where we had a sympathetic shutdown. Started really on the 23rd. There was a series of tests that we were doing here on the system where we were spending a majority of the system time with the grid power switched off anyway. And so then when the PG&E shutoffs actually hit on the 26th, we decided to go ahead, all right, we're going to go ahead and turn the system power completely off, and we'll leave it off until everybody recovers from the PG&E shutdown. Well, they got all the power back on the 30th, 31st, somewhere around there, but we were doing fine. We're still doing fine. And so we'll go ahead and close out our first week in November, and we'll take a look at what those numbers were as we got back to the point where we turned the system power back on. We didn't turn it back on because we were out of power. We actually turned the grid power back on because the batteries were full. And with no place to put the power, well, it would start turning our solar system off for part of the day. And so instead of having that happen, we went ahead and re-energized the grid. But let's go ahead and get back over to the studio and we'll go over those numbers for the first week in November. All right, welcome back to the studio. Interesting week here. So the basic theme for this recap is pretty much the same as it was for the last week in October. We're still kind of examining to what degree a power outage would have affected our system. And basically, if you recall, we've been off the grid since the 23rd of October. So it really goes a little deeper than that, though, because if you look back at the previous videos that we've done, what you'll notice is that we've basically been self-sufficient from right around February the 5th. In that range of February the 5th to February the 21st, we were in that point where we were hit and miss as far as our break-even point, and then by the time we got to that point between February 21st and March 14th, we were getting to the point where on certain days and certain weeks, we would wind up having the system up to 100%, and we would need to actually charge the car and start driving on sunlight to be able to deal with those extra miles. And so then that's what we started to do. And so from March 14th to November the 5th, which is the end of this week's update here, we've hit 9,500 miles, just short of that 10,000 miles that we had predicted that we would drive on sunlight. And so obviously we'll give a full account of that in a couple of months when we close out our year. But what does this mean for our test? Well, what you're about to see as this test kind of continues this week, we got through this entire week without drawing from the grid at all at any point, and in fact we had left the system on zombie apocalypse mode where it was completely severed from the grid all the way through to the 5th of November when we turned the grid back on. But we turned the grid back on not because we needed power, but because the system was 100% and we needed some place to put the power. Otherwise, like I said in the opening, the system would start shutting the power down. But the icon for the car, you'll notice, is still missing from these from this week's update. It's just not realistic to say that you're actually going to be driving any distance on 3, 5, 8 kilowatt hours of overage that we have. It's still enough to be able to, squirrel away a little bit of power for when the rains do hit. We're expecting to have rains probably I would say late in November, early in December. Most certainly, the weather's going to wind up turning, but it's just not realistic that I would say that you're going to be doing any driving on sunlight from this point on. And so, with that, let's go ahead and take a look at this week. And so we'll start off on the 1st, as we are wont to do now. And so here we've got November the 1st, obviously still on zombie apocalypse mode. We've got no mileage recorded for the car today. We'll talk a little bit about that later this week. And obviously no charge to the car. The last time we actually put a charge to the car from the home system was on October the 28th. And past that, there just wasn't enough freeboard to justify it. And since we're at that time of year now where before it usually took us 2 or 3 days to fully recover the system after charging the car and get us back to that 100%. Now it takes us about 8 days. And so obviously it's now more important to bank a high reserve in the battery than it is to power the car. We want to be sure that now, as we're starting to enter those days where we might have more rainy days, that we wind up being able to make it. And so see here we have a daily production of 30.3 kilowatts and home usage of around 20. That's temperature dependent a little bit too because of the amount of heating that we're using, but this is our benchmark for the 1st pretty much, because you've got a nice sunny day here. And so you can also see the days are becoming drastically shorter, but you can't easily see the effect that the reducing sun angle is having. And so that's one of the other contributing factors into our total production going down. And the notes, and I'm going to give you a while with the notes here this week because I got a little wordy, but as you can see, I wanted to make it clear that we were still showing the vehicle icon at this point, but not actually charging the car. And this is where it becomes an individual choice of your household. You know, we chose to put the power to the grid, but you know, we wanted the reserve to remain high, and so our reserve was 63%. And so you may personally have chosen that, okay, well, if we want maybe a 10% reserve or something like that, that you could then feel free to put that 10 kilowatts of surplus to the car, and that would give you about 30 miles of driving or so. But like I said in the intro, we're looking at hitting that break-even point about now, and so it's more important to me now to be able to kind of get the overall system charged to a point where we can get past a few rainy days and that kind of a thing. So, and on the 2nd, starting the day at 50%, ending at 76, another day of giving us a bit of a surplus that could have gone to a car, but we chose not to. We're a little stingy now again with how much power we use during the day. You know, usually we're a little higher this time of year, but again, it's temperature dependent. So this day was a little bit warmer, and you know, so a little less heater use. The heater icon, we had it there because we used the heater, but we didn't really use much power at all. The circulating fans were hardly on at all, and so the notes basically that we got a hazy condition, good production, but the shortening of days, like I mentioned. Give me just a second with that. There's not really anything there, and so the 3rd, it's that time of year again, and so as you can see in the note there, this is daylight savings time, so the starting and ending times have shifted. So for those of you who are entering this information into spreadsheets, be sure that you make an adjustment for that offset. And here's the notes. Just that, no vehicle data, since we won't likely be doing any more driving on sunlight this year. So give you a second looking at that. And the 4th, starting at 65%, ending at 92. Again, slight surplus right around that 10 kilowatt hour mark. And so I'll give you a minute with those numbers. Everything's pretty much self-explanatory. And the notes this is a little wordy here. I'm going to give you a moment with that, but again, sounding like a broken record here. But if you look at the averages of the days, they're really starting to hit the limit of our north-facing panels, and so we're seeing that cutout about this time of year, where the sun angle is such that we're not getting much power at all from those panels. And then also the circulating fans were on a little bit longer today. And the 5th, more of the same, but today is a little special. As you'll see, we hit that 100% in the charge in the system, and I wound up wasting just a little bit of power because I actually hadn't expected to hit 100% today. I thought it was going to happen tomorrow, and so I wound up being out of town. But once I came home, I switched the system back to grid power to start sending that excess to the grid. And the notes, just that. I'll leave you with that for a second. That's basically exactly what I had said. And then we go to the 6th. Got a partly cloudy day. Still wound up pumping some to the grid, just a little bit, and came up just to that, over that 1 kilowatt hour that I consider to be my cutoff as to whether or not I'll actually show it as a contribution to the grid. So, and then the one thing to note here also is that that total from the grid at 1.4 kilowatt hours, that is due to an anomaly that's kind of being persistent, and I'm not really sure whether or not that is due to the heaters coming on in the system. I wouldn't think so, but I'm going to watch that over the next couple of weeks to see if temperature seems to be a factor as far as how many spikes we're seeing. Are the batteries trying to keep themselves warm? Don't know, but I'll try and find that information out for you. But that all does kind of relate back to that software change that they had done in October, that we'd been following, end of September really, that we'd been following, where things have kind of changed a little bit. So I'll keep you guys up to date as I find out a little bit more information on that and the notes. And so again, let's go over this a little bit because it's a little wordy. But this is the day that our generator versus solar shootout ended. But as you can see, the system here is still going strong at this point. And so this is the day that I affirm that we really aren't using the vehicle icon anymore, because honestly, you know, we don't have the freeboard to support it. And so then what you'll see from this point moving forward is that we're not going to use the vehicle icon any longer. And so again, honesty dictates that's where we show this. We'll also be able to, when we do end the year, we'll actually then be able to bracket that. Initially, when we did first start driving on sunlight, I thought, ooh, you know, did I make a mistake? You know, should I have continued to draw from the home? But then in retrospect, I kind of realized that no, you know, as long as we keep track of how much driving that we did actually do overall, that number can very easily be applied to the house and subtracted off the top of what we used. And so the way that we did present it really was, I think, the cleanest way to present this, so that you guys can see what the actual numbers are and how they would equate to your household. And then that allows you to add or subtract from that, depending on what your usage are, what type of a vehicle you actually use. If you use something like a Chevy Bolt, your watt hours per mile actually won't equate the same as what we use. The Bolt's a little bit more efficient than the Model S, and so I really do think this is probably the cleanest way that we could have presented this, so I don't feel bad about that at all. And so here is the 7th. And as you can see, we dropped 18% overnight. Again, pretty typical. Ending that previous day, that was at 100%. We start up today at 82. And again, pretty typical. 26.4 kilowatt hours produced from the system, 21.4 used. That's right in that average ballpark area for this time of year. But you can see that the Powerwall gets a workout with that. So let's look at that for a second. And then the notes. Again, I'll give you a couple of minutes with this, but basically, again, repeating what I'm seeing in the average numbers, and then looking at the graph of where we're starting to see that fall off as far as the amount of power that we're producing. And so I also kind of go over the performance benchmark here, where we're talking a little bit about the solar minimum. And at this point, we're 44 days from solar minimum, so we'll be watching our production really closely right around that day, so that we can again set up another benchmark. We started this test on the 1st of the year, and that was about 8 days after solar minimum, but get the idea. And so then we'll close with our traditional 8th day here, and as you can see, pretty typical overnight use. This may increase slightly during the coldest days of the year as we start to go into late December and into February, but the circulating fans here are on a bit. Still got a decent production of 27 kilowatt hours, fairly sunny day, home usage of 24.3. And we didn't quite make our 1 kilowatt hour threshold for showing the icon of putting the power to the grid. And in notes, again, no grid icon. I'll give you a moment with that. We'll pick this up next week anyway. And that brings our first week of November to a close. I hope you've been enjoying these updates. I realize for most subscribers this is a little dry, but it's important to chronicle these weeks as they go, so that folks can kind of follow along block by block and really kind of get a feel for how the various times of year will reflect in what they're seeing in their own households. So that will continue obviously until we hit our end of the year, when we're going to be doing a couple of months of conclusions on all of this stuff that we've found with the driving and with the home use as it changed throughout the year. I think you guys will all be able to see how that applies to your own systems that you have, or if you're thinking of expanding your systems or getting a new system, it should really give you guys some solid information to work with. But as always, I wish you the best with your own systems, and we will see you next week.